Welcome to another episode of On This Day on the Grilly Truth Sports Network. I'm your host, Mike Goodpastor, and today we're going to talk about December 24th, Christmas Eve, 1982, the day that Tiny Chaminade, a division or NAIA team, beat one of the best teams in the country, Ralph Sampson's Virginia Cavaliers. Now, it was seemingly a lifetime ago, though not long enough to erode the widely held belief that Chaminade's 77-72 victory over number one ranked Virginia was the biggest, greatest upset in college basketball history. Because really, I think you'd be hard-pressed to ever find another game like this. Because, like I said, we're not talking about Appalachian State as a 1AA team beating Michigan. We're talking about an NAIA team beating a D1, top 5 team in the country with a man most people thought was going to be the National Basketball Player of the Year. Now, another startling upset occurs that causes people to invoke Chaminade's name, and that would have been, over a year ago when the University of Maryland, Baltimore County beat top-ranked Virginia 74-54. And the thing is this, that was a 16th seed beating a number one seed in the NCAA tournament. But if an NAIA team beat Maryland at Baltimore County, it would probably be a bigger upset than Maryland at Baltimore County beating Virginia in the NCAA tournament. So anytime you get an upset like this, Chaminade finds itself in this conversation. And that it was Virginia both times in 1982 and again in 2018 gives this discussion a kind of poetic refrain. It amazes people. It amazes me that people don't forget the game for some crazy reason. That was a quote from Coach Lopes, who is now 86 now. And he said, we're going to see what happens to Maryland and how people talk about them 35 years from now. Now, when he says Maryland, he means, of course, Maryland at Baltimore County. And I think, make no mistake, since it was the first number 16 to beat a number one, it will be talked about for a long time. Now, Chaminade was, and still is, it's a tiny Catholic university, fewer than 1,000 students. I think at the time it was like 850. And they shared a campus with a high school. They were about a mile from Waikiki. And Chaminade was actually in the process of this time, in the process of changing the school's name. They wanted something easier to remember, something easier to pronounce, and they wanted it to be the University of Honolulu. But then its basketball team beat Virginia. And Virginia was not just a basketball team at this point. They were the number one team in the country. And Chaminade was suddenly famous and forever remembered. And you couldn't change the name. How could you after people had made T-shirts and stickers that read, "Yes, Virginia, there is a Chaminade." They really made that shirt. Now, the name Chaminade became a household name. And I think that, the president of the university actually said it's so recognizable now. We're very proud of that. And this was almost 40 years ago. And, I don't think Maryland at Baltimore County is going to change its name because its name was made by beating Virginia also. I guess it doesn't seem right to compare the two. Like I said, Chaminade's victory came, so to speak, at a different time and a different place. UMBC's feat unfolded in a full-sized, full arena in Charlotte, North Carolina, in real time everywhere. Countless people around the world presumably gathered around television screens and mobile devices to watch it happen. The UMBC Athletic Department's Twitter account played along as a color commentator, and its followers grew tenfold, pushing past 50,000 just during the course of that game and a little bit after. Now, in contrast, in 1982 in Honolulu, the only people watching were the 3,383 counted in the Neil Blaisdell Center, which was not even half full. There were no TV cameras, and news of the upset in the middle of the night in the early hours of Christmas Eve for most of the United States took hours, even days, to spread across the mainland. Now, as Sports Illustrated wrote a decade later in an article titled "The Greatest Upset Never Seen," Chaminade's victory, among other things, assured that ESPN and its cable spawn would henceforth permit virtually no game to go untelevised. The culture and the game were different back then. There was no shot clock, no three-point line. That didn't come along until 1987. In Virginia, with 7'4" center Ralph Sampson, who was the two-time player of the year, was undefeated. It had beaten Georgetown about 10 days earlier, what was dubbed, despite occurring 2 years into the 80s, the game of the decade. And that game was promoted similar to the 1968 game at the Houston Astrodome between Elvin Hayes and the Houston Cougars and UCLA and Lou Alcindor. It was kind of the same thing. It was a game I think Raycom Sports broadcast all over the country. And, it was a huge deal. And Virginia dominated Georgetown. Now, that Georgetown team was a year removed from losing the national championship. And in 1982, they weren't nearly as good as they had been in the 81-82 season. This was 82-83, and in 82-83, I believe Georgetown lost in the second or the third round to Memphis. Now, Georgetown. Virginia and Sampson arrived in Hawaii also from Japan. They had just beaten a really good Utah team and the University of Houston, which had been gaining steam as a high-flying juggernaut that would be known as Phi Slamma Jamma. The Cavs were 8-0, and Honolulu was basically meant as a rest stop on the way home. Now, this is the same Houston team that they beat that had, Hakeem Olajuwon, and that Houston Cougar team would end up being a Final Four team. Now, like I said, Chaminade, and this is the thing that really blows me away when you look at this. Chaminade, as I said, was an NAIA school. They had lost to a school called Wayland Baptist 2 nights earlier. At the time, Coach Lopes, who was the Chaminade coach, was also a junior high school counselor. He coached Chaminade on the side. Now, this game was tied all the way through. The teams were tied at 43, unlike what happened on, a couple of years ago with UMBC, where they just kind of turned a halftime tie into a blowout. This was the contrary to that, where Chaminade fell behind by 7 midway through the second half. Now, the Silver Swords, which, they're named after a plant, chipped away at the lead. Sampson was guarded mostly by Chaminade's player by the name of Randolph, who was their best inside player. And I think Randolph was only like 6'4", 6'5", maybe 6'6" at most. They knew each other from Virginia, where they both grew up. And Randolph spent years guarding Sampson in rec leagues and in high school, and reportedly even dated Sampson's sister. And later on, he would say they were just good friends. Now, Randolph, knowing he could not compete with Sampson inside, hit several mid-range jump shots that pulled his opponent from under the basket. Randolph scored 19 points and hauled in 5 rebounds. Sampson was held to 12 points, but still had 17 rebounds. And, Ralph was so caught up in playing those big guys like Hakeem Olajuwon and Patrick Ewing that I think he forgot about guys that could step out and hit jumpers. And when Chaminade's Mark Rodriguez lobbed a pass over Sampson on a backdoor screen to fellow guard Tim Dunham for a dunk, the score was tied. This game was taken a lot more seriously then. Mike Wilbon, who you see on ESPN all the time, the newspaper he was working for, he remembers telling the story where they didn't even want him to go cover the game, but he was already there. The number 1 team in the country was playing. And at halftime, when the game was tied, he called them and told them, whatever you do, don't go to print or don't put the paper to bed until this game is over. Something special could be happening here. When the game was over and Wilbon called, they said that the paper was already put to bed and he had to wait till Christmas Day to put the story out. Nobody believed this could happen. Now, Dunham, who had to dunk, attended school at St. Louis School, the Catholic school that shares a campus with Chaminade. And he soon broke the tie for good with a 22-foot jumper after the dunk with just over 5 minutes remaining. That was when fans in the building truly began to believe that they were witnessing a game that would resonate across time zone and over years. Chaminade usually attracted dozens of hundreds of fans, not thousands. Most were there that night to see the best team and the best player in the country. not a scrappy squad of NAIA locals. Now, as the game unfolded, it was a little quiet. But all of a sudden, when they got the lead in the last 5 minutes, the crowd kind of switched over. Randolph, who was on the Chaminade team, said you got chills. And you could just feel the murmurs in the crowd with people mumbling, are they really going to beat these guys? Now, Virginia was down by 2 points. They missed 3 shots in the final minute. Then Chaminade sealed the victory with 3 free throws. The post-game photograph on the court, taken after fans in the stands called the team out of the locker room for an encore, is on a wall that serves as a Hall of Fame at Chaminade. The 1982-83 team was inducted in 2013. The victory spawned the Maui Invitational, an early season tournament that attracts some of the top programs to Hawaii. Chaminade now has moved up to Division II college basketball, and they play in the Pacific West Conference. And they play in that tournament, the Maui, and occasionally they upset one of the big schools, despite having lost its element of surprise more than 3 decades ago. And I know that the story I heard was during the Virginia game against UMBC, you even had a coach say, hey, we don't want to go down in history like the team that lost Chaminade. And this was 26 years later. Now, these days, Chaminade has over 1,100 students. 70% are from Hawaii. 71% of the students are women. A movie deal about Chaminade's upset win over Virginia is in the works, said William Villa, the athletic director. That hopefully will help to perpetuate the Chaminade legend to a whole new audience who weren't in the world in 1982. Back in 1982-83, it was not Virginia's only upset loss to Rock College basketball. Jim Valvano's North Carolina State Wolfpack beat Virginia in the final of their conference tournament, which got the Wolfpack into the NCAA tournament. They wouldn't have been there without it. And once they were there, they went on a run. And, of course, in the regional final, they played Virginia. And Sampson missed a shot at the buzzer. North Carolina beat them. I think it was like 63-62, which set up North Carolina State's dramatic championship victory over Houston. Another game that is mentioned in the debate over, history's greatest upset in college basketball. Now, it seems like every year more and more people were at that game. That's what, the Coach Lopez said. He said there was only 3,000 that night, but he said, I'm pretty sure I've talked to 80,000. Just said they were there. Now, the sad thing is there's no video of the game. And I've talked about this on other shows. And sometimes the myth is better than what actually happened. I think here we all need to see the video because there is no bigger myth than an NAIA team, the proverbial David, who beats Goliath. And Goliath was 7'4" in shorts. On this day, Christmas Eve, 1982, the greatest upset in college basketball history, Chaminade beats Virginia, and maybe the greatest upset in sports history. All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and wrap the show up for today. I want to remind you can hear On This Day every day between 10 and 11 on thegruelingtruth.com. Make sure you stop back tomorrow for our Christmas Day edition. Until then, this is Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.